Well, a very good evening and welcome to the first ever episode of Newsnight here live on the BBC. We launched this programme at a moment of profound constitutional and international consequence. Tonight, we ask a question that cuts to the absolute bedrock of British democracy. Is Parliament exercising genuine oversight, or is it merely witnessing an unprecedented executive overhaul? The House of Lords, over the past few sessions, is currently in the stage for a dramatic legislative battle. At the centre of the storm is the newly formed OBBA Bill, for short, the largest single piece of legislation in SUK history. Now, this is not a routine administrative update, it is a sweeping structural rewrite of our constitutional frameworks, an overhaul so massive that its true scale is only just beginning to be digested by the British public. But the real crisis isn't just what's written in this mammoth bill, it is how it is being pushed through. The upper house, yesterday, the House of Lords, descended into a high-stakes game of political musical chairs as peers aggressively manoeuvred, substituted and traded seats on the newly formed OBBA Select Committee. The Lords know that our very capacity to properly scrutinise, debate and check this bill is underway. In just a few moments, we will be joined live by the Attorney General for our flagship headline interview, where we will robustly cross-examine the government's chief legal advisor, interrogating the core pillars of this bill and demanding the answers on whether traditional checks and balances are being potentially bypassed, all under, of course, a lens which is fully politically impartial. But while Westminster wrestles with domestic reform, Britain's global footprint has just shifted. Tonight, we also examine a major diplomatic milestone. The United Kingdom has successfully secured its seat on the United Nations Security Council following the hard-fought fifth rotatory elections. At a time of deepening international instability, we will look at what this means for Britain's foreign policy, our global leverage, and the strategic responsibilities now resting on London's shoulders. Two massive stories, total domestic overhaul, and a critical seat at the world's most powerful diplomatic table. This is Newsnight, and now let's get into tonight's show. So our first topic tonight, of course, is the OBBA Bill, and here is a deep dive into the bill. To understand why tonight's interviews with the Attorney General and later on the leader of the Radical Party are so critical, we have to look past the political noise and examine the raw mechanics of the legislation. Let's be entirely clear about what we are dealing with. The Omnibus Bill for British administrative reform, the OBBA Bill, is a colossal legislative framework consisting of 10 distinct parts stretching over 100 individual sections. It isn't just an update, it is an overhaul that systematically rewires the relationship between the British citizen, the courts, the police, and the Crown. Let's break down exactly what is written into this text. Part 1 sets the tone by acting as a sweeping legislative broom. It repeals and amends vast trenches of historical legislation, in some case wiping previous acts of Parliament from the books entirely, as if they had never been enacted. Most notably, it permanently repeals the Title Deprivation Acts, though significantly, it does not reinstate any of the titles that were previously revoked under them. Moving into the professional sector, Part 2 overhauls the legal system by introducing a highly flexible legal services scheme. While day-to-day operations are expected to see the Inner Temple remain the central regulatory body, this section fundamentally places the regulation of legal services on sustainable statutory footing designed for long-term structural flexibility. But it is the realms of criminal justice, policing and state power where the OBBA Bill introduces its most radical transformations. Part 4 completely upends the British sentencing framework. It imposes hard statutory limits on custodial sentences, capping imprisonment at just 56 days for life or maximum seriousness offences, 42 days for any other indicable offences, and a strict maximum of 14 days for non-indicable offences like common assault or taking a vehicle without consent. To balance these shortened custodial windows, the bill introduces a highly rigid regime of licence conditions that individuals can be placed under immediately upon their release. When we look at frontline policing, Part 5 strips back decades of procedure. It completely removes the statutory requirement from the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 to make a written record of every single stop and search, legalising the reality of daily operations while simultaneously rendering any stop search conducted without an eventual record strictly unlawful. Furthermore, it completely abolishes the necessity test for arrests, making it legally permissible to detain individuals purely to hold them in custody. Crucially, for the political dynamic, Part 5 also, strips away the powers historically held by the Mayor of London in real life, of course, transferring the absolute authority to appoint and remove senior police officers directly to central government control. Beyond domestic policing, the bill stretches into national security. Part 6 enacts major amendments to the Terrorism Act 2000, while Part 7 completely replaces the Armed Forces Powers Act. This marks a profound return to strict constitutional principles for military deployments, placing His Majesty's forces firmly under the control of the civil authorities. While standard training operations remain exempted, a powerful emergency clause grants the Secretary of State the direct authority to deploy the armed forces domestically under centralised political control. When we reach the halls of Westminster, Part 8 enacts severe reforms to parliamentary law. It targets the House of Lords by correcting long-standing structural anomalies and permanently removes all temporary peers by the end of this current Parliament. It also equates National Security Act offences with Terrorism Act offences, meaning a conviction under either results in immediate removal from the upper house. For the House of Commons, it eliminates the loophole where members of Parliament can retain their seats while in prison, explicitly giving political parties the statutory right to fire MPs upon a criminal conviction alone without requiring a minimum prison sentence. Part 9 codifies the sensitive issue of honours. Following intense cross-departmental consultation, it establishes a strict statutory framework for the formal return of honours from individuals who voluntarily leave the jurisdiction for more than 21 days. Crucially, it introduces a formal right of appeal to prevent political abuse, though it grants the Lord Chancellor the ultimate safeguard to suspend this entire section for the duration of one Parliament if necessary. Finally, Part 10 establishes the ultimate legal dominance of this legislation. It includes a sweeping supremacy clause, ensuring that where the OBBA Act conflicts with any other statute, this Act reigns supreme. It also hands the executive extensive secondary legislation powers, allowing the government to draft rules, regulations, and sentencing guidelines with minimal delay, subject only to subsequent parliamentary review. So that is the overview of the OBBA Bill 2026, clearly a structural re-engineering of the British state, condensing sentencing, policing, military deployment, and parliamentary accountability into a single 100-section document. The fundal friction tonight is simple. Is this a vital modernisation of an administrative system, or is it a fast-tracked concentration of executive power? Well, we're about to find out. Let's put these points directly to the government. Joining me now here live on Newsnight in our very first interview, it is the Attorney General. A very good evening to you.
Thank you for having me, and I hope this is a conversation that not only allows us to answer questions that you have, but educate the wider public on the nature of this proposed legislation.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on the show tonight, Attorney General. So obviously, I'm just going to get into the questions first of all, so we can get going tonight. So let's start with the sheer architecture of the bill, because it is a long bill, of course. Part 10 contains a supremacy clause stating that where this act conflicts with any other act of Parliament, the OBBA Act reigns supreme. Why does a modernisation bill require what some critics may call, for example, a constitutional blank check, if you will?
So the powers you're referring to is Section 96. So the reason that this clause exists within Part 10 is solely due to the fact that if a power under this bill, for example, regarding the appointment and dismissal of police officers is here, it would be unfair for a power held in old legislation that just hasn't been found and repealed to be used to get around the checks and balances of this legislation. And that is throughout this bill why that's been done. Otherwise, you could find appointments of judges being done under legislation that isn't this, where they're on completely different terms and conditions and have different powers, for example. And therefore, there needs to be one regime for the statute around these appointments, dismissals, etc. And the only way to guarantee that is to extend the doctrine of implied repeal, a cornerstone of constitutional law, but that has its limits, to statutorily extend that to cover this legislation fairly, because otherwise this could be abused, and that's why that clause exists. I will note that the doctrine of implied repeal is standard constitutional law, and this just extends it for this act.
And obviously, as I mentioned just before, a very long Act of Parliament, the longest in the community's history, by packing 10 distinct policy areas, ranging from a whole host of topics from military deployment to stop and search, into one single 100-section Act of Parliament. Well, not an Act of Parliament yet, a bill, I should mention. Wouldn't you say you're intentionally trying to overwhelm parliamentary scrutiny? Why not present these as separate, independently debatable bills?
The reason for these bills having been these subject matters having been grouped is because these are the subject matters the government feels require the most urgent attention. And due to the time left in Parliament, we felt that it was most appropriate for parliamentary time to be spent discussing the one bill, covering everything. And we are open to amendments, I will say, where they are reasoned and justified. And my DMs are always open to not only Parliament, but members of the public who have positions where they feel they can add feedback to our legislative proposals. But we needed to put this all through, giving Parliament the most time to scrutinise it, and therefore it's been done. What I will say is the bill clearly states parts and chapters, and in some chapters even has cross-headings to ensure that it's clear about the different subject areas, so that people cannot find that there are things they haven't realised are there, because just by reading the 10 titles and the chapters within those titles, they will have a very good idea of what this legislation covers.
Just want to go on to the scrutiny point a bit more. Obviously, you have mentioned the length of this Parliament. It was about a week to go until the Purdah period begins. The BBC understands when this bill was first presented to the House of Commons, it was passed significantly quickly, all three readings within, I want to say, about 10 minutes. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But is there any reason why the bill was passed at such great speed, which potentially may not have allowed for further scrutiny within the Commons chamber?
The main reason for the passage within the Commons so quickly was to enable the bill to be sent to the House of Lords as a matter of priority, as we did have, we had intended for there to be more of the opposition there to discuss the bill in the Commons. We didn't feel it would just be 10 minutes. We'd hoped for a debate on the bill and discussions on the bill that evening. But unfortunately, due to the lack of attendance, the bill was passed within 10 minutes, and it was felt appropriate to send it to the Lords as soon as possible so that they can make their amendments or other feedback that they have on it, whether that's through their amendments or if they wish to discuss amendments with us and agree amendments now, so that there's time for a parliamentary ping pong from the Lords, rather than us sending a bill to the Lords that, if they don't pass clean, dies, and then we end up with us not having a very good opportunity to pass this legislation.
And of course, the House of Lords have begun their scrutiny, of course, beginning the OBBA Select Committee, which we'll no doubt touch on a little bit later on tonight. But let's go to the start of the legislation, into Part 1, which explicitly repeals the Title Deprivation Acts, which have become Acts of Parliament over the years, but crucially doesn't, reinstate those effective titles. What is the point of repealing the Title Deprivation Acts if you're not going to effectively give back the titles to the individuals affected by them?
The main purpose of repealing these enactments is due to the standard principles with regards to statute law revision acts, are the way it's mainly done by the Law Commission, but it's primarily because these acts serve no further purpose. They have had their effect, they have therefore become spent, and it's good practice to remove such spent legislation from the statute books when it's no longer serving an active purpose. This doesn't act in any way to prevent the titles being reinstated by a further Act of Parliament, as currently has happened previously with Title Deprivation Acts being repealed as if they'd never been enacted, but this merely just clears up the statute books a bit, and that's why it also does similar of repealing the Spend Home Office Powers and Accountability Repeal Act, as it serves no practical purpose to leave that repeal act on the books. So we should just clear it up, keep the statute books as clean as we can, serving as good a purpose as possible, and making it as simple as possible for those who wish to come into the legal sector in this group to have an understanding of the legislation that's in this group and has effect.
And will the government in the future potentially introduce acts of parliament, new bills that will give the individuals affected by these title deprivation acts those titles back? We did see it with the Lord Saunder of Edinburgh earlier this parliamentary term, so I'm just wondering if that is something that the government is actively engaged in.
At this point, the government has no policy with regards to reinstating titles that have been deprived by an Act of Parliament. It's important to remember these titles have not just been taken for anything. These titles have been taken following both Houses of Parliament and the King in Parliament granting them royal assent. Therefore, we feel that repealing the legislation is standard, but we feel that reinstating these titles is a decision that should only be taken in the most serious of circumstances to justify it, and we would consider the introduction of a bill in appropriate circumstances, but so far we've seen no circumstances justifying such an introduction.
Okay, we'll go on to page 4 now of the Act, which introduces drastic caps on custodial sentences, specifically limiting prison time to just 56 days for life or maximum seriousness offences, and 14 days for non-indictable offences like common assault. How, in your view, do you believe that a 56-day maximum sentence is enough time for such a heinous crime being committed? There's a wide range of crimes, obviously, that could require a life sentences. How does the government think that 56 days specifically is justifiable for that?
We feel that 56 days acts as a suitable deterrent from those committing such serious offences that justify life imprisonment, such as murder, where that is a mandatory term of imprisonment. You cannot receive any lighter a sentence, and the discretionary terms within manslaughter, the standard term being for manslaughter of a police officer being life, and such other sentences, because certain sentences under the Firearms Act and under the Terrorism Act will also carry life sentences, and we feel 56 days strikes the balance of not forcing somebody out of a group, but providing a suitable deterrent from carrying out any further offences.
Okay, let's flick forward again to the next part of this Act, Part 5 of the Act, which completely abolishes the necessity test for police arrests under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Now, this means that a citizen can now be arrested and deprived of their liberty purely so they can be held in a cell without the police needing to prove it was necessary. As the chief legal advisor to the Crown, how do you square that with fundamental civil liberties and the right to be free from detention?
The power to arrest a person still relies upon the reasonable grounds to suspect that that person is guilty of an offence. This is not removing the test to arrest someone. A constable will still need to, at the very least, have reasonable grounds to suspect an offence has occurred and reasonable grounds to suspect that a person is guilty of that offence. The reason why we are abolishing the necessity test is because the necessity test has issues that make it unsuitable for the platform and is rarely followed on this platform. with the reasons of the necessity test, including enabling you to a constable to identify the person by name and address. But that doesn't seem to work very well with the platform and is therefore not suitable. You then start to get to causing physical injury, preventing someone causing physical injury to themselves or any other person, or suffering physical injury. So therefore, for that, yeah, we'll see that on the platform. But if somebody's committed an offence where they're just carrying something unlawful, that doesn't necessarily fall into that. And you start to see it causing loss of or damage to property. You can see that potentially happening on the platform, and you can definitely see causing an unlawful obstruction of the highway happening on the platform. But, and I'll ask you this, can you see a person committing an offence against public decency on the platform, or an arrest being necessary to protect a child from them on the platform?
Well, look, as a representative of the British Broadcasting Corporation, and to preserve our political impartiality, I'm going to leave that question there. But I do appreciate it nevertheless.
Also, Murray is a great example.
Thank you very much indeed. Ognian, for that, we'll be coming to you shortly after we have concluded the interview with the Attorney General. Is that what all you had to say on that question there?
On the necessity phase, yeah, that's all I have to say, because it really is just a making the platform suitable with how high the bar for necessity is as well. It's worth remembering you only have to suspect the person has committed the offence, but you have to believe the arrest is necessary. Therefore, you need a real high level. Almost, if you would put it on a scale of 1 to 10, you'd need to be at 7 or 8 on that scale to believe the arrest is necessary. And I don't see how that works on the platform, and neither do my colleagues.
Sticking with part 5 now, we're just going to go over to stop and search, as part 5 of the stop and search area of this part of the Act removes the requirement to make a written record at the time of the encounter, yet it simultaneously declares any search without a record to be illegal. Don't you think you might be creating a logistical minefield for frontline officers of the Metropolitan Police and stripping away vital transparency that protects certain communities in this country?
With regards to the repeal of Section 3, because that is all that this does, it repeals Section 3 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, which is a constable's duty to create an exercise, to create a record of a search anytime he exercises the power of stop and search under a series of offences. It's not just the power to search under stop and search, but it includes the power to stop and search under any act, and the requirement to make that record. It doesn't happen on the platform, and we could try and make a requirement for these searches to exist, but invalidating all the searches by having this Section 3 continuing application, suddenly you can probably start to see how this would end badly. Say, for example, the Metropolitan Police do stop searches. Somebody could bring a tort claim against those police officers for the stop and search because they didn't make a written record, and that written record was not made available at a police station for 3 months. And therefore it's entirely unsuitable to continue in its current form. If the police or if the public feel there's a need to require stop and search records, then that can be considered. But the current requirement, where it would invalidate any search if a copy of the record isn't available at a police station for 3 months, and that record including what was being searched for, the grounds for making that search, where and when it was made, and the ethnic origin of the person, as well as the constable's ID, you can start to see how massively onerous this is on the police if they're doing a stop search to make this record before they can move on to the next job.
And coming into the final part of the interview now. Just a few more questions to go, Attorney General. We're going to skip ahead now towards the end of the Act into Part 8, in which political parties are given the explicit statutory power to fire a Member of Parliament upon a criminal conviction for an offence without requiring a prison sentence. Certain critics from across the political parties who do not believe that this section of the Act is right may say that this Part 8 is undermining the independence of the House of Commons. What do you say to them?
So this is important to understand that this is just amending part of the Parliament Act, where the Parliament Act specifies the circumstances in which a Member of Parliament can be dismissed, and that includes failure to comply with a 3-line whip or violating a party's constitution without specifying what terms should be in that constitution, nor the terms of when a 3-line whip can be imposed. So therefore, by extending this power to dismiss members of Parliament from the party where a person has been convicted of a criminal offence or is on licence following a criminal offence, and this is only for the period, for a specified period. This is not an indefinite power. You can't say, oh, you were convicted a year ago, we're going to sack you for it. There are time limits within the section, as it's inserted as Section 21A of the Parliament Act. It therefore works in a way where parties get the same freedom they would have if someone violated their party constitution for someone who committed a serious offence. I will also note that if a person is in prison, they may not be a member of the House of Commons, which is inserted later in as the new Section 25A.
Continuing on with Part 8 here, something that we didn't mention in the deep dive a few moments ago. Part 8 also fast tracks the approval time frame for international treaties. Why is the government in such a rush to reduce the window for parliamentary debate on major international agreements that could feature stuff such as joint defence operations and, issues along those lines?
The reason that the government has taken this decision is that in the real world, 21 sitting days is usually accomplished within 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. Occasionally 5. It depends on where it sits with regards to the requirement for both houses to be sitting and the Friday exceptions. Whereas within this group, Parliament and the Lords, so the Commons and the Lords, will sit approximately every 3 times a week. And therefore that reduces this to a week, which with our shorter parliamentary terms is still a significant time of the parliamentary term, which allows for scrutiny and debate without unduly burdening the government to take months. Well, because 21 sitting days, I'd be shocked if we had 21 sitting days in a parliament thinking about it, because if the Lords sit twice a week, that would be 10 weeks and 1 extra sitting before that we'd reach the 21 sitting days of just the initial threshold, bearing in mind there's 2 separate thresholds that have been amended within the Act.
Okay, and just the final question for you, Attorney General, before we wrap up the interview. The House of Lords spent Tuesday night arguably in total chaos, with peers from across the chamber swapping seats on the OBBA Select Committee via substitution motions. If Parliament's upper house is treating the scrutiny mechanism of the government's bill like a game of political musical chairs, how can the British public have any confidence that this historic overhaul is receiving a sober and impartial evaluation?
I am seriously concerned about the state of the other house with regards to scrutinising this bill. As of yet, we've, as the government, have had no requests for information from the committee. We've had no even communication, as far as I'm aware, at least my department hasn't, from the committee about the legislation, especially as we have seen provisions where we believe there are better ways to do it and slight amendments could be made. And we feel that it is completely inappropriate the way that the upper house has been treating this legislation. And I am deeply concerned for the British public that we may not be able to pass this important legislation before the end of this Parliament. And as may or may not be aware to the British public, but the current state of the Parliament Act in this group means that the House of Lords could indefinitely veto this legislation if they wished to, which deeply concerns me based on the political games they've been playing with the committee.
It is an interesting scenario to watch, and one that the BBC will be watching closely. Attorney General Tom CH16, thank you very much indeed for appearing on tonight's Newsnight.
Thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful opportunity to bring this message to not just yourselves, but to answer hopefully what many people are questioning.
Absolutely. Attorney General, thank you very much indeed. This is BBC Newsnight. It is 7:38 p.m, just coming up to 20 to 8. And in the headlines tonight, diplomatic crisis deepens as Croatia accuses Ukraine of intelligence operations against Yugoslavia. The crisis began when presidential candidate and former President Franciszek conducted a highly controversial unsanctioned visit to Belarus, a nation with which Kyiv has frozen official diplomatic ties. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Belarus, the talks were aimed at establishing defensive and political cooperation to counter aggressive actions from regional neighbours. His Majesty the King has appointed Ethnical IV as the new Governor-General of Jamaica. In a statement from Buckingham Palace, it read that His Majesty had recently met with the late Governor-General prior to the transition, expressing his deep gratitude and thanking him for his tireless service to Jamaica and the Commonwealth, with the appointment taking place immediately. The British Army has expanded its armoured fleet with a new Ajax vehicle order, with the Ministry of Defence placing a significant new order for those armoured fighting vehicles as part of an ongoing initiative to expand and modernise the British Army's capabilities. While the exact size and total cost of the procedure remain entirely unknown, senior defence sources confirmed to the BBC that the Army has purchased an undisclosed number of units to bolster the state's mechanised divisions. The influx of new hardware is expected to significantly upgrade the tracking and heavy intervention capacity of ground forces, replacing aging old platforms with highly digitalised combat systems. More international news. Croatia has issued a final ultimatum to separatist regions amid rising tensions, in which the President of the Republic Croatia formally announced a strict zero-tolerance policy to the self-proclaimed region, which has broke away from Croatia. A name which I unfortunately cannot pronounce. It is in the BBC News channel if you would like to read that. Obviously, the geopolitical landscape in southeastern Europe faced a significant escalation following a high-stakes directive issued from the highest levels of the Croatian state. In official communication released from the presidential palace in Zagreb, the Office of the President of the Republic of Croatia has formally announced a strict zero-tolerance policy towards the self-proclaimed republic, declaring the breakaway administration an entirely illegal separatist entity with no constitutional legitimacy under the Constitution of the Republic of Croatia. International observers are watching the borders closely as the risk of active conflict remains a critical turning point. Over the weekend, the national celebrations of His Majesty King Nicholas I's Platinum Jubilee drew to a close as the investiture ceremony at Kensington Palace closed the ceremonies, where all individuals who were featured on His Majesty's Jubilee Honours List received their medals in person. And finally, the Metropolitan Police Service has launched an entry scheme guidance, as Inspector Sir Hendo Radcliffe, who also coincidentally serves as chairman here at the BBC, issued new guidance for individuals applying through its entry scheme. The guidance outlines the standards applicants are expected to meet when completing their application, with a strong emphasis on communication, honesty, and attention to detail. So this is BBC. That was your BBC News headlines. It is 7:42 p.m. on Thursday, the 9th of July, 2026. You're watching Newsnight Live, the first news night of the BBC's reign, if you want to call it. And shifting back focus to tonight's main topic on the OBBA Bill, I am now joined by the leader of the Radical Party, Ognia O, who is joining me here live in the studio. Very good evening to you, Ognia.
Good evening, Director General. It is glad that you invited me here to provide the other side in speaking against this piece of legislation.
Indeed, you and your party are opposed to the OBBA Bill. So for a balanced argument, of course, we have indeed got you on the show. So let's get into the questions for tonight's interview. While you and your party are opposed to this legislation, obviously the government introducing this legislation full steam ahead are very much in favours on it. You know, they argue it's a long overdue modernisation of the community. But by opposing this bill, aren't you simply standing in the way of efficiency and defending what some may call an outdated status quo?
Well, this piece of legislation is the clear example that the government was right about the radical argument, which is the only part which makes this argument that real-life legislation should be entirely repealed and the UK Parliament should operate with only legislation passed by us. Currently, this piece of legislation is some sort of legislative diarrhea, some sort of vows between our legislation and real life legislation, and just making it an entire mix, entire legislative confusion regarding everything. Why on earth is there a piece of legislation covering honors police, judicial appointments, creation of a new constitutional court, etc., etc.? Let's not mention the notorious section 62, which allows the government to do whatever they want to do with piece of legislations, as it is written. We are at the radicals are heavily against this piece of legislation, so because of the authority that gives to the government in terms of the legislative powers it gets, as well as the whole mix it does. It would be better to present it into multiple different bills and cut out the entire real life element and just make it into Roblox. What concern in the radicals, we're not against efficiencies and bureaucracy. We are the party that wants to cut it entirely. We want to entirely reform the whole system, yes, but we want to do it in a totally different way. I agree with the government in some principles within these legislations. However, I'm mostly in disagreement with the in the ideas proposed within this bill, as most of them already exist to most of the extent. They love to mention barristers and solicitors in one of the parts when there haven't been even a single solicitor in the entire group's history. They love to mention a lot of real life elements which are done through a Roblox way, and then they legislate in a third way now, which creates an entire legislative confusions. And I fully understand the words which I don't disagree regarding their existence, but they tried to fight it off as it was passed in the comments for what he said, 10 minutes.
And you have just mentioned there that you don't disagree with the entirety of the bill. There are certain sections in which you do agree with. Can you name which parts of the bill you do agree with?
For example, I agree with the repeal of the titles deprivations. I don't believe they should be, because in my time there have been many cases where many peers have been revoked from political reasons, such as Dr. Sanders' peerage was removed due to political reasons. I believe his title should be restored. So I welcome the government repealing the legislations, but I believe it should be taken further. I agree on some legislative clearing regarding outdated legislation, of course. I agree with putting a maximum limit for offenses, even though I wouldn't put it as high as 56 days, but it's still a step into the right directions. But what I disagree with the bill is the fact of how it cooperates with real life legislations. I believe it would be entirely better to cut out everything from real life and just make everything Roblox fight. So, for example, if it amends the if it amends the, I don't know, the interpretation act I'm looking right now, then just remove it and make a Roblox one, which can be made into 2, 3 pages. Or if it on offenses one, for example, murder. Oh no, murder is common law. Actually, let me open the bill to see what other real life legislations it mentions. But yeah, I believe they should be entirely cut out and instead we focus on Roblox fixations, because then he says because it allows, it makes a clear confusions. What is Roblox law? What is real life law? And then when a Roblox amends a real life law, it becomes just an entire confusion.
And let's advance on to part 4, sentencing caps, which obviously, as we've mentioned, 56 days for maximum seriousness offences and 14 days for minor offences. 56 days, might I add, up from the previous 12 days. And I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, the Radical Party opposes this section of the bill.
Yes, we oppose the entire bill because we don't like how it interacts with the real life legislations and how it is one bill for everything, which is not how it's done in the United Kingdom way. What exactly we're opposed this? Yes, I welcome that there is no real life land centers like imposed in Roblox. That would be silly. But we have to remember the fact this is after all a community, which there is a police force. This where there must be a demand, which means crime, and for crime there should be people who are not in the jails. So this cycle of community should, after all, still be played. Of course, there should be prosecution service for in-game crimes, but they shouldn't be as high as Discord crimes such as electoral rigging, corruptions, racketing, embezzlement. They should be, yes, I agree, they should be way higher. They should be high crimes, while in-game crimes which move the community and the police force activity and the armed force community, I don't say they should be stimulated, but they shouldn't be punished with the fullest of the law, because after all, that's what makes Westminster the game plays, and soon Manchester, if God's willing, comes out.
Yeah, the government argued that the increased sentencing numbers are acting as a deterrent to deter people from committing crime on London.
If you want an active police service cut crime, yes, in that case, I would agree. If they want the police service to do nothing, after all, do it. Yeah, they forget the fact this is not a real life where killing somebody on Roblox doesn't mean it's over for them. No, they just respawn. Yes, I agree, for political assassinations and stuff like that, there should be some sort of punishment, and for mass crimes, there should be punishment. Yes, but after all, you should allow the police to have a demand, to have a purpose to do.
And we are going to quickly go through to part 8 of the bill, which allows political parties to dismiss MPs who are convicted of offences without waiting for a prison sentence. By opposing this bill, why are you fighting to protect convicted criminals retaining their seats in the House of Commons? And don't you think the public have the right to see criminal politicians who have previously
What
been
in the
Parliament
radicals? Yeah,
removed?
thank you. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I agree that people convicted of a crime should be disqualified from sitting of the House of Commons. Yes, I believe that should be the case. However, and I agree when the Chancellor Kovacs was serving a prison sentence and still was effectively the Chancellor, I was heavily opposed. I was one of the main people. I was then in the Unionists who heavily opposed it, and we have agreed in the Radicals the same stance. Convicted people shouldn't be in Parliament. However, it should be really crucial to recognize that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. That's why they should that principle to operate it, because let's not forget our state is governed by fundamental principles. And speaking of fundamental principles, if you would allow me to shift to section 62, powers to reform guidelines, rules, regulations, etc., which I believe is entirely an authoritarian wall, as it's known as the Henry VIII clause. While on earth is the government allowed to regulate everything without any parliamentary oversight, with a touch of a signature? this is an entire overreach of executive power which overshadows the entire operations of Parliament. And this is our main opposition against this bill, but of course we oppose the entire principle of a bill to be such a long piece of legislation, some amending pieces in a real life acts, and then being a single act about 10 different things, which I believe is silly.
And just because I am peering at the clock and I'm wary of time, I'm going to ask you a final question, which was coincidentally very similar in wording to the final question which I asked the Attorney General in regards to, as it said, it could be described as chaos in the House of Lords on Tuesday night, with peers executing rapid substitution motions to swap seats on the OBBA Select Committee. Obviously, we know the Radical Party stance is to abolish the House of Lords in its entirety. So I'm just interested to know the radical position on the scenes that we witnessed.
Well, I believe if this bill really wanted to get a proper scrutiny, why was it not made a joint committee with both sides? Why was there not any debate within the House of Commons that passed in 10 minutes? We believe in a one chamber system where the parliament is big, with experts, and with the existence of committees, rather than how it's done with two chambers, with the Lords being notoriously known for doing these political shenanigans since the dawn of time. I agree with the Attorney General that the powers of Lords are too much regarding legislations and their delay and their veto. And I agree that this committee is a political stunt of scrutiny, a political try to get headlines to say they're scrutinizing a bill, which the bill through committee, they're using the committee as some sort of saintly word, saying that with committee only experts would see it, but we see that everybody wants to be expert in the art. So either it should be debated by the entirety House, which I believe is the right corrections, or there should be a joint committee to address both concerns from the Lords, which from the Commons, which debated for only 10 minutes, which is, I believe, is unacceptable for the People's House, and for the Lords also raise their so-called expertise.
Okay, Ogniano, leader of the Radical Party, thank you very much indeed for coming on tonight's Newsnight. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you very much indeed. It is 7:53 p.m. This is Newsnight, and before we go on to our secondary topic of the night, we are getting a little bit of breaking news from the United Nations, from the Republic of Finland, as a statement from the Office of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Finland has been posted in the past 50 minutes. It reads, the Republic of Finland wishes to formally notify the international community that tensions along the Finnish-Russian border are rising. We have observed increased activity near our eastern border and wish to make our position very clear. Finland will not be provoked, but Finland will not stand down. Our border stands, our people stand, and we stand ready. The Republic of Finland calls upon all friendly nations and the United Nations to take note of the developing situation and stand in solidarity with Finland's sovereign right to defend its people and its territory. And it ends with the quote, a nation that does not defend its borders does not deserve to call them its own, says the Prime Minister of Finland there. So the breaking news we've received in the past few minutes is that tensions along the Finnish-Russian border are rising, and that the Finnish government are not standing down. So that's the news that we have got in the past few minutes, and it leads us nicely into the next section of tonight's programme. While Westminster remains deeply consumed by the constitutional friction over domestic administrative reform, London has just secured a massive hard-fought victory on the global diplomatic stage. Following a grueling and heavily contested fifth round of rotatory elections at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, the United Kingdom has officially secured its seat on the United Nations Security Council. To understand the weight of this development, we have to look at the sheer friction that defined this election cycle. Landing a seat at the world's most powerful diplomatic table is never a guarantee, especially in a rotatory election, but the fifth round of balloting was particularly intense as member states wrestled over allocations, shifting alliances, and competing geopolitical priorities, with the United Kingdom ultimately pushing through the final ballot to consolidate its mandate. This success comes at a time of escalating regional instability, most notably highlighted by the deepened diplomatic and intelligence crisis unfolding across Eastern and Southeastern Europe, between Ukraine, Belarus, Yugoslavia, and Croatia. So what does this hard-won seat actually mean for British foreign policy moving forward? First, it provides the United Kingdom with immediate enhanced structural leverage to shape international resolutions, enforce multilateral sanctions, and directly influence global peacekeeping mandates. In an era where regional conflicts threaten trade routes and international borders, holding this seat allows the United Kingdom to move from the sidelines of international arbitration directly into the driver's seat. Secondly, it imposes a massive strategic responsibility on the Foreign Office. With the seat secure, the UK is now tasked with managing the deep fractures currently dividing the Council's permanent members. This means that London will be forced to spearhead delicate diplomatic negotiations, balance fragile coalitions, and project stability at a time when institutions are being questioned more than ever before. The government is hailing the successful fifth-round vote as definitive proof that Britain remains an indispensable global power. We saw the Foreign Secretary comment on the news immediately after the UK had secured the seat, with very informal announcements saying, "We achieved Security Council. Thank you, France." And the Prime Minister, Wadja Badger, then going on to say, yeah, look, we don't even need an official statement because footy is on. We got Security Council. It was difficult, but we got there. Thanks. Which indicates that it wasn't a ale sailing route for the government to take there. Okay, this is Newsnight. It is 8 o'clock. We are now going to examine the strategic responsibilities now resting on the UK's shoulders and look at how London intends to deploy this newfound leverage on the world stage. And joining me now live here in the studio, it is the Permanent Secretary of the United Nations, Force Tinvus. A very good evening to you, Force.
Yo, hello there.
Welcome to the programme. It's good to have you on for our final interview of the night. It is 8 o'clock. As a quick time check for you, I won't keep you long. Just a few questions on the international achievement that has taken place in the past few days on Saturday night. So the United Kingdom had to endure grueling rounds of voting to secure this seat, unlike UNC, when we were part of the Permanent Five and had a seat on the United Nations Security Council automatically. This obviously indicates significant, not necessarily resistance, but resistance action from the government to pursue to get this target set in stone. Does this process suggest that Britain's traditional influence among member states is growing now that Britain has secured this seat on the Security Council?
Absolutely. They're right. And I had to phrase this, sometimes I'm not the most creative speaker, as anyone can tell. We came into this UN as not a very light group, put it that way, considering the only other alternative UKs that are active is SOVs. But now we're actually doing quite good, despite obviously some opposition and some disagreements. But I think we can be quite influential. I don't think, in the nicest way possible, I don't think we'll get in the P5, just purely because of how UNV works. But we can always remain influential and as a strong member of the Security Council. That's all I'm saying. You get what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously this victory, significant victory for British foreign policy, comes at a time in the past few days where we are seeing volatile diplomatic crisis in Europe involving Ukraine, Croatia, Yugoslavia and Belarus. And obviously in the past few minutes we've heard the news on the Finnish Russian border. What mechanisms can the Security Council deploy under the UK's tenure, so the UK leading the efforts to support peace and stuff, to de-escalate these disputes now that the UK obviously has a greater diplomatic effect before these, not conflicts, but before these disputes can fracture stability within the United Nations?
I personally believe, like, as much as the Security Council does, hold its power, in reality, people don't have to listen, if you understand what I'm saying. It's more so like we can sit there and be like a diplomatic medium, because I'm open for like diplomatic talks. Just let people argue it out, but also make sure they don't like blow each other up on Roblox, obviously. It's more so a case of what the whole of the Security Council want to do, assuming they want to use us over, say, something like Thailand, or it's just a matter of what they think and what they want us to be involved in as a newer member.
Yeah, indeed. And as the permanent ambassador to the United Nations, obviously the UK hitting the ground running now within UNV, how much can this seat on the Security Council achieve for Britain? Or would you say this seat is a symbolic victory with little structural meaning, or does it carry some significant weight?
It's a bit of a both thing. We have the ability to approve or deny organisations or newer members who happen to be on the Security Council due to being like replaced. We also have the ability to vote on greater like resolutions or motions and such. But it's also it is mostly quite symbolic in terms of Roblox, obviously, because it's just a smaller version of the General Assembly with more greater checks and balances. Obviously, we're not on the P5, so we aren't able to like veto stuff and act as if we're like the greatest groups ever. It's more so a nice place to be because you can get along with the more like senior nations, as you could say. Air quotes,
Yeah.
obviously. It's but then you can also help build up the lower, not as senior like the regular General Assembly. Obviously, and everyone should respect each other. It's a nice thing to get along. You obviously won't, but there'll be a lot more like respect going around. It'll be people would want to meet us more if you understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It is a seat that does contain diplomatic meaning. You're amongst the big boys, to put it in a sense. Just because I am wary of the time of the programme and we have been on air for almost an hour now, I'm going to move to the final question. Are there any specific expectations being placed on the United Kingdom by any member of the United Nations Security Council to spearhead any diplomatic peace talks or anything, especially considering the current ongoing situation in Europe?
As far as I'm aware, I haven't been told anything regarding that yet. That is more of a government thing, like the actual foreign secretary and his purview. But as a former, like, obviously I didn't serve in the Foreign Office in every UK that's been the Security Council in UNB, but as someone who's been a part of a lot of them in different like bodies such as intelligence, I understand that having someone familiar internally to help resolve disputes for other people over certain issues is much more beneficial. So while I understand we're not under any pressure yet, I believe it's a good idea that we put ourselves forward instead of waiting to be put forward. I believe it'll cement us even more. Obviously, P5's up to the ownership of this group of UNV compared to real life, which obviously is going to be different. But I believe if we put ourselves forward rather than waiting to be called upon, it will benefit us and everyone else a lot more.
Absolutely. Permanent Ambassador to the United Nations, Forrest Tinvus, thank you very much indeed for appearing on Newsnight tonight. It's been a pleasure having you.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much indeed. And well, That is that. A sweeping constitutional battle at home over the OBBA Bill and a hard-fought diplomatic triumph in New York following an escalating crisis, fracturing international relations across Eastern Europe. The battle lines have been drawn and the mechanisms of power are shifting rapidly. We, of course, here at the BBC will be tracking all of these developments as they unfold, and you can get all the latest updates from the BBC in the BBC News channel, in the SUK server, and through the official BBC News server, which is now being attached on the end of every single one of our articles. So that is all from us here tonight on the very first episode of Newsnight. It's been a pleasure having you on tonight, watching and listening. Thank you to all of our guests here tonight. The BBC will be back with more live coverage and more shows over the coming weeks as the general election draws closer and further developments take place. But from all of us here at the BBC team, from Newsnight, thank you very much indeed for watching, and have a great rest of your evening. Good night.